In the summer of 1940, the free world stood on the very edge of darkness. Nazi Germany had conquered most of Europe, and Britain stood alone, battered and afraid. Everyone expected her to fall. But one defiant old man refused to surrender. With nothing but words and an unbreakable will, he rallied a frightened nation to fight on against impossible odds. His name was Winston Churchill. He had been written off as a failure, a relic of the past whose best days were behind him. Yet at the most dangerous moment in modern history, he became the voice of courage that helped save civilization itself. This is the story of a deeply flawed, brilliant, and stubborn man who, in his nation's darkest hour, refused to bow. Winston Churchill was born in 1874 into the very heart of the British aristocracy in the magnificent halls of Blenheim Palace. His father was a famous politician, his mother a celebrated American beauty. By birth, he had every advantage in the world, except the love and attention he craved. His parents were distant and often absent, leaving the lonely boy aching for their approval. At school, he was rebellious and stubborn, a poor student who infuriated his teachers, and few saw any promise in him at all. But beneath that difficult exterior burned a fierce ambition and a restless imagination. Young Winston was determined more than anything to make his mark upon the world and to win the recognition his father had never given him. Unable to shine in the classroom, Winston found his path in action and adventure. He entered military college, became a dashing young cavalry officer, and threw himself into the wars of the British Empire. Hungry for glory and fame, he also worked as a war correspondent, sending thrilling dispatches home from distant battlefields. During the Boer War in South Africa, he was captured and taken prisoner, but Winston refused to be held. In a daring and dangerous escape, he broke out and fled hundreds of miles across enemy territory to freedom. Overnight, the story made him a national hero. The neglected boy who had longed to be noticed had finally seized the spotlight, and he intended to use his new fame to launch himself into the world of power and politics. Riding his fame, Winston Churchill entered Parliament while still in his 20s. Bursting with energy and ambition, he rose with astonishing speed through the ranks of British politics. He was brilliant, eloquent, and fearless, but also impulsive, arrogant, and impossible to ignore. He switched political parties, made powerful enemies, and pursued bold and controversial ideas. By the start of the First World War, he had risen to one of the highest offices in the land, placed in command of the most powerful navy on earth. He seemed destined for the very top. But Winston's reckless ambition was about to lead him into one of the greatest catastrophes of his career, a disaster so terrible that it would nearly destroy him completely. In 1915, Churchill championed a daring plan to break the deadlock of the First World War, a massive naval and land assault on the Gallipoli Peninsula. He was certain it would work. Instead, it became a bloody and tragic disaster. The campaign collapsed into chaos, and tens of thousands of young soldiers were killed for nothing. The failure was blamed squarely on Winston. Disgraced and humiliated, he was stripped of his power and cast out of high office. His glittering career lay in ruins. Many believed he was finished forever, a reckless gambler whose ambition had cost too many lives. Broken and depressed, Churchill left government in shame. But this was not the end of his story. It was only the beginning of his long years in the wilderness. For more than a decade, Winston Churchill wandered in the political wilderness, ignored and out of power. He filled the lonely years by writing books and painting quiet landscapes. But as the 1930s darkened, he saw a danger that others refused to face. Across Europe, Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany were rising, rearming, and preparing for conquest. While Britain's leaders desperately sought peace through appeasement, Churchill stood almost alone, warning again and again that war was coming. and that the nation must prepare. They dismissed him as a warmonger, a bitter has-been-crying wolf. But Winston would not be silent. And as Hitler's armies finally marched across Europe, the world began, far too late, to realize that the lonely old man had been right all along. In May 1940, catastrophe struck. Hitler's armies swept across Europe with terrifying speed, and one nation after another collapsed before them. Britain stood on the brink of defeat, and her government was in crisis. In that desperate hour, the nation turned at last to the one man who had seen the danger coming. At 65 years old, after decades of failure and rejection, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister. He took command of a nation that stood almost alone against the most powerful war machine the world had ever seen. The odds were overwhelming, and many expected Britain to surrender within weeks. But Churchill had been preparing for this moment his entire life. As he later wrote, he felt as if his whole past had been but a preparation for this hour and this trial. Churchill's greatest weapon was his voice. In a series of unforgettable speeches broadcast across the airwaves, he gave a frightened people the courage to stand and fight. He offered them nothing but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. He vowed that Britain would fight on the beaches, fight on the landing grounds, fight in the fields and in the streets, and that they would never surrender. His defiant words turned despair into determination. He could not promise easy victory, only struggle and sacrifice. Yet somehow, he made his people believe that they could endure and that they would prevail. In Britain's darkest hour, Winston Churchill's voice became the very sound of hope, steadying a frightened nation against the gathering storm. The trial was terrible. Night after night, German bombs rained down on London and other cities in the Blitz, and in the skies above, a handful of brave young pilots fought to save the nation in the Battle of Britain. Through it all, Churchill walked among the ruins, defiant, flashing his famous V for victory sign. Slowly, he forged a mighty alliance with the United States and the Soviet Union, shaping the grand strategy that would finally turn the tide of the war. After years of struggle and sacrifice, victory came at last in 1945. Nazi Germany was crushed and Europe was free. Churchill had led his nation through what he called its finest hour and stood among the towering figures who had saved the world from tyranny. Yet history is rarely simple. Just weeks after his greatest triumph, the British people voted Churchill out of office, hungry for change after years of war. The great leader was suddenly cast aside once more. But he was not finished. He warned the world of a chilling new danger, declaring that an Iron Curtain had descended across Europe, dividing the free West from the Soviet East. He returned to power once again, won the Nobel Prize for his writing, and became a beloved elder statesman. When he died in 1965, the nation he had saved mourned him as a hero, and the whole world paused to honor the man who, in its darkest hour, had refused to surrender. Winston Churchill, the flawed, defiant lion who, in the darkest hour, refused to bow.